If you believe that new plants and factories can dot our landscape, that new energy can power our future, that new schools can provide ladders of opportunity to this nation of dreamers, if you believe in a country where everyone gets a fair shot and everyone does their fair share and everyone plays by the same rules, then I need you to vote this November.
All right, new plants and factories, new energy, new schools, and a fair shot. What's wrong with that?
I wonder if the fair shot includes the taxpayers. But we've had factories before there was Barack Obama. Hard as that is to believe, you know, and we've had less of it since he came in.
Okay, Tom. So let me ask this question, which is politically incorrect, which makes it all the more important to ask. Some component of the voting public voted for him last time around as an act of national expiation because they felt, and I frankly, I could feel it myself. We were all proud, even those of us who supported the opponent, we all felt proud the following day that the United States of America, the Constitution takes slavery into account, the Civil War, but finally we have a black man as President of the United States. All right, that's perfectly understandable. We know that took place. 4 years later, what about the argument that it is so important for him to get this right, so important as a continuation of this national act of expiation and healing and so forth, that in some way it's only right to give him, frankly, more slack than you might.
Affirmative action for president.
Well, there you go. I suppose that's what it amounts to. I guess you don't buy that one.
Well, when you realize that the President of the United States has the lives of 300 million people in his hands, he has the future of Western civilization in his hands. He has the freedom that has been inherited over the centuries in his hands, and he's already starting to dismantle that. I really don't think it's a question of any individual, whoever's in the White House, being cut any slack. The last thing you need to do is cut slack to people who have power over 300 million other people.
Tom Sowell this past summer, quote, "The America that has flourished for more than 2 centuries is being quietly but steadily dismantled by the Obama administration," close quote. Now you note the way the Obama administration has used executive orders to waive provisions in the No Child Left Behind Act and to repeal, your word, the legal requirement that welfare recipients must work. He's the president, Tom. Doesn't he get to make adjustments in this law or that law?
Well, he didn't. The oath that he took of office was that he would faithfully execute the laws. Now, I don't think they meant execute in the same way that the mafia means it.
Thomas Sowell on Obamacare, quote, "Obamacare imposes huge costs on some institutions, while the president's waivers exempt other institutions from having to pay those same costs. The law says you've got to do this, and over here we have the Secretary of Health and Human Services granting a waiver to this person or that entity, or this waiver's taking place over here." Well, it's legal. Nobody seems to have sued them for that.
One of the great problems is that people do not react. I mean, when all is said and done, the Constitution of the United States is a set of words on pieces of paper. The only way that the Constitution can protect us is if we protect the Constitution. If we rise up in revolt, if we vote out of office people who violate the Constitution, then, of course, it will mean something. If people can do this, say a few pretty words, and we say, oh, well, then the Constitution will, over time, erode to the point where it will mean absolutely nothing. There'll be nice words on paper, but people with power will just do what they feel like.
What about those 9 people in black robes who sit on the bench across the street from the United States Capitol? Isn't it the job of the Supreme Court of the United States to defend the Constitution?
It is, but they alone can't do it. And more importantly, if Obama gets reelected, he's probably going to have 1 or maybe 2 more members to appoint. And from that point on, it will just be a rubber stamp for whatever he chooses to do.
To the economy, Tom Sowell, quote, "We are not yet Greece, but we are not exempt from the rules of arithmetic that caught up with Greece. We have just a little more time," close quote. So what's going to go wrong? Let's assume Barack Obama, for the moment, let's assume Barack Obama wins re-election. What bad things happen?
For one thing, we start running out of money. And that's the problem of Greece. See, the secret of the welfare state is you can do almost anything in the short run, juggling money from here to there and so on. But in the long run, the arithmetic can't be ignored. And in the long run, you're going to run out of money, which is what's happened in Greece, which is starting to happen in Spain, and which can happen in the United States.
So you're an optimist. That is to say, the welfare state, against which you have devoted enormous professional energies over these several decades now, is about to come to an end, one way or the other.
That's right, but it makes a difference how it comes to an end.
Okay, so that's what I'm trying. What feels I mean, look, we have 8 point something or other % unemployment. As a matter of fact, if the same number of people were still in the workforce as were when President Obama took office, the unemployment rate would be 11%. The economy is really bad.
Yeah.
But by historical standards, it's still a wealthy country.
Yes.
People can get by. Journalists are already defining this state of affairs as the new normal. So really, 4 more years of Barack Obama does what to us? We can skate by, Tom.
The question is, how long can you skate? Greece discovered that there does come a point where there is no more money. In Spain, people are already leaving Spain in drove and taking their money out of the Spanish banks with them. One of the things that you can do in the long run, they'll be forced to do, is simply print more money. And as they print more money, that is simply a hidden form of taxation. I mean, when the Federal Reserve creates money to buy government bonds and keeps the interest rate low in order to make the price of the debt service low, what that means is that if you have your money put aside in the bank and you're getting 1% and the inflation rate is 3%, that means they're taking 2% of your savings every single year, and you know how compound interest is.
Right.
And even under the current conditions, a $100 bill in 1998 would not buy as much as a $20 bill would have bought in 1960. So the thievery that goes on through inflation is huge. The Republicans, I think, have the notion that because so many people are unemployed and on food stamps, that is a negative for Obama. Franklin D. Roosevelt was elected in a landslide after having an unemployment rate higher than Obama's. There was not a single month in the first term of Franklin D. Roosevelt when unemployment was not in double digits. And in a number of months, the unemployment was over 20%. And he won the biggest landslide in American history. So there's the people who think that the economy is the key, that you can't win if your unemployment is 8%, forget it.
Shortly before the Obama administration took office, the man who would become President Obama's chief of staff, Rahm Emanuel, said, quote, "You never want a serious crisis to go to waste," close quote. Why do you find that significant?
Because it means that the crisis is presenting them with an opportunity to do things they wouldn't be able to do otherwise. And that's how he sees it. And everything that has happened since the new administration indicates that that's how the administration as a whole sees it.
So the crisis is providing an opportunity for President Obama and his supporters to do what they would have liked to do,
yes,
but would otherwise have been unable to do.
Just as in the case of the New Deal, that the New Dealers, most of the key people in the New Deal, were for big government intervention long before there was a stock market crash. It's just that the stock market crash gave them an opportunity to step in. It's another parallel is that people are talking about all these highly intelligent people with whom the president has surrounded himself. In Washington, FDR surrounded himself with highly intelligent people. That is no guarantee of anything except brilliant rationalizations for failure in some cases.
All right. Let me push back a little bit, Tom. When President Obama took office, the financial system appeared close to collapse. Serious economists, including our colleague at the Hoover Institution, Robert Barrow, wrote that there was a significant chance of not just recession but depression. And today we've got a financial system that's functioning. Housing prices are settling rather than crashing. And there seems to be a general consensus that we'll see a recovery within a year to 18 months. So Why not take President Obama at his word and simply impute to him the motives that he claims? He came into office, passed a stimulus bill and a raft of other measures because of the financial crisis demanded that he do so, and it seems to have worked.
Well, I'm not as optimistic in predicting how things are going to be wonderful in a couple of years, but we'll know more in a couple of years. If you look at the stimulus package, the one thing it has not done is stimulate. Prior to the bailout money for the banks were lending a certain amount. After the bailout money, the banks were lending less. The stimulus means that he's not depending just on the government's own money being spent producing the result, that this will stimulate others in the economy. It is not. The circulation of money, the speed with which money circulates in the economy, fell to the lowest level in 50 years. It fell during
after the stimulus.
Yes. Business reduced its investment by something like 25 or more %. So that if you're looking in terms of what actually happens rather than the words that are used, what actually has happened shows no such stimulation as they're talking about.
Barack Obama, during the same debate, if a woman is out there trying to raise a family, trying to support her family, and is being treated unfairly, then the court has to stand up if nobody else will. And that's the kind of judge I want.
That's unconstrained. That somehow or other there are people with the judicial robes on who can just decide these things ad hoc, which among other things would mean we would no longer really have law. You would discover, once you got into the courtroom in front of the judge, you would then discover what the decision is, but you'd have no clue beforehand.
So that would, a full embrace of the unconstrained vision, which Barack Obama seems intent on, would overturn the fundamental basis of American law, which is a nation of laws, not of men. It
Absolutely.
would be a nation of men, of judges.
Yes.
All right. September of this year, the Rasmussen polling company asked this question: should the Supreme Court make decisions based on what's written in the Constitution and legal precedents, or should it be guided mostly by a sense of fairness and justice? Close quote. 82% of McCain supporters said the Supreme Court should base its decisions on the Constitution. 29% of Obama supporters agree. 11% of McCain supporters said the Supreme Court should make its decisions on fairness. 49% of Obama supporters said that it should. Now, here's the question. You've said McCain constrained, Obama unconstrained. But what this would seem to indicate, this polling data, that this is not just a debate taking place among politicians or American elites. It's reached very deep into the American public.
Oh, absolutely.
49% of Americans think the Supreme Court should...
Of Obama supporters.
49% of Obama supporters, exactly, say so does that startle you? Does it alarm you?
It doesn't startle me, it depresses me. But, this has been going on for a long time. People complain about a court decision on the basis that they wish it had turned out differently. But that isn't the judge's job. There was a wonderful case, and I wish I could remember the title of it, in which Clarence Thomas said that he really agreed with the position taken by one of the litigants in the case, but that he wasn't there to decide that issue. He was there to decide what did the law say. And the law said otherwise, and so he voted against them. You see the same thing in Oliver Wendell Holmes, where in a number of cases, he makes very cutting disparagements of one of the litigants in the case and then votes in favor of him. Because I'm not here to decide what the merit is. And one of his decisions, he said, I am not at liberty to discuss the justice of the act. The act is what it is, and once I know what that is, that's the decision I have to make.
Well, then, if you see, one more question here. You write, the unconstrained vision, again I'm quoting you, has tended historically toward creating more equalized economic and social conditions in society, even if the means chosen imply great inequality in the right to decide such issues and choose such means, close quote. Inequality in the right to decide issues. Does that tell us why the left in the United States seems so much more comfortable with having courts make social policy?
Oh, absolutely.
That's what's going on.
Absolutely. That they want equality of outcomes, and they will choose how to make the outcomes equal. But they don't want equality of choice on the part of the people themselves. Many of the liberals say that they're for the family because they're for creating all kinds of goodies to give to families. But they want to take away the family's fundamental function, which is making decisions for members of the family itself, particularly the younger members who aren't yet grown. Obama has an absolute talent for saying things that make no sense, but not only sound plausible, but inspiring. You know, we're subsidizing the oil companies when they deduct the cost of doing business in order to arrive at the figure of how much net income they have. Everybody does that.
Right. So this notion, though, that if you're rich, you ought to pay more. Straightforward enough, no?
It is straightforward, but it's also straightforward nonsense.
Why is that?
People don't, but they often speak of people who are rich as people who happen to have money.
Right.
Extremely few people happen to have money.
There aren't that many Rockefellers.
Well, but Rockefeller didn't happen to have money.
But his heirs happen to have it.
Heirs happen to have money.
So you're drawing
Rockefeller reduced the cost of oil to a fraction of what it had been before him, benefiting millions of people across the country. Therefore, they bought their oil from Rockefeller rather than from people who had more expensive ways of producing oil. For example, one of them being the use of tank cars on the railroads. The progressives were livid that Rockefeller could ship his oil at a cheaper price than the other producers. It never occurred to them that Rockefeller shipped his oil in tank cars, which are a hell of a lot cheaper to transport than in barrels. Right. I mean, we still measure oil in barrels today, but we ship it in tankers.
Right.
And that's how he became a multi-billionaire.
So we know from the study of economic history that wealthy people get wealthy by creating jobs, lowering prices of products. Rather than Bill Gates, the richest man in America, one of the richest men in the world, invented an entire industry that simply didn't. All right, we know all that, and we also know, as we mentioned earlier, that cutting taxes worked to spur economic growth in the 20s. Again, under John Kennedy in the 60s. Actually, it was Johnson who ended up. Most of the tax cuts took place, let's call it under the 60s, and then again in Ronald Reagan in the 1980s.
And then George W. Bush.
And George W. Bush. So how is it that he can stand there in the face of this overwhelming evidence and be taken seriously? I'm not asking now about Barack Obama as an intellectual. I'm asking about the people listening to him.
That's the question of the hour. You have people who don't stop and think. You've had dumbed-down education. You've had propagandistic education. And people, what he's saying connects with all those kinds of things.
All right.
In fact, it goes the other way too. I was just doing some research on Detroit and its decline, and they kept raising the city income tax. And every time they raised the tax rate, the tax revenues went down. In 2008, Charles Gibson put this to Obama when he was a candidate. He said, "Why are you for raising the tax rate on the rich? Because you often get more revenue at lower tax rates than at the higher tax rates." And he said, well, it's a question of social justice. In other words, he doesn't really care about whether the government raises more revenues. If he can get people mad at the rich and they vote for him, then it's a success. Just as Coleman Young's policies in Detroit were a great political success for him. Mm. It ruined Detroit, but it didn't.
I just you and I happen to be reading on a similar subject. From 1950 to the present, two things happened. One was that the population of the United States of America roughly doubled, and the other was that the population of Detroit fell by roughly half.
Yes.
Unbelievable. All right. Barack Obama in August of last year, quote, "In the first 100 days of my administration, I will travel to a major Islamic forum and deliver an address to redefine our struggle. I will make clear that we will stand with those who are willing to stand up for their future and that we need their efforts to defeat the prophets of hate and violence." Close quote. What do you make of those two?
I think Barack Obama has a lot more faith in verbal interactions than I would. What he's proposing under the guise of change is what has been tried for 2 decades between the two world wars, and which failed disastrously in helping to bring on the Second World War.
Barack Obama's plan for defense spending as of last year, I'm quoting his speech, "I'll stop spending $9 billion a month in Iraq. I will cut tens of billions in wasteful spending. I will cut investments in unproven missile defense systems. I will not weaponize space. I will slow our development of future combat systems, and I will institute an independent defense priorities board to avoid unnecessary spending," close quote.
Well, that's straight out of the 30s. There were people who were saying Britain should not. The British Labour Party in the early to mid 30s voted consistently against defense spending, and they argued that our security does not depend on armaments, but on disarmaments. And so when Chamberlain went to Munich to talk to Hitler, it wasn't just his own party, the conservatives, who applauded him when he came back. It was the Labour and liberals as well. He was probably the most lionized man among Western leaders, perhaps, of the past century.
You mentioned the, I think you would call it a naive view of world affairs, that he places a great deal of faith in rhetoric, the ability of rhetoric to solve global problems. This reminds you of the 1930s. It reminds you of Neville Chamberlain. I read you a quotation of the notion of spreading the wealth around, and again you said that's perfectly pure socialist doctrine from the 1930s. Would you argue that this man is the most left-wing, or the purest embrace of the unconstrained vision that we've seen in American politics since when? Since the New Deal?
Since the Great Society? American politics.
Really?
Yes. Yes. I mean, even FDR, pulled back on some things. But Obama really, he does have the unconstrained vision, which is really an elitist vision. It says, I know what is the best to be done, and I will do it. When he says, I will change the world, you realize this is a man who has actually accomplished nothing other than advancing his career through rhetoric. And it reminds me of a sophomore in college, who thinks that he can run the world because he's never had to run anything. And you can believe that only until you have personal responsibility for consequences. And that's when it gives you a little bit of humility.
Why don't the American people see through that? Isn't that the fundamental bet that the founders made, that that voters would see through, ultimately they'd see through nonsense?
Yes, but that was before nonsense became a large part of the curriculum of our educational institutions.
I was talking about this with a colleague of ours the other day, Tom McCurdy, who's an economist here at the Hoover Institution, and Tom said, well, remember what happened when Bill Clinton became president. His point is the American people are about to get an extreme illustration of the way government intervention messes things up. Bill Clinton offered only a mild illustration, and yet even under Bill Clinton, it was only 2 years before there was enough of a backlash response that Republicans took both houses of Congress away, and the man was boxed in from that point forward. That's a pretty optimistic reading of what might happen. In fact, very optimistic.
Yes, because there is such a thing as a point of no return, and if in those first 2 years Iran gets nuclear weapons, we will be at that point of no return, and the next generation will live under that same threat and as far out as the eye can see. And so sometimes people who are very clever say it's just as well to let these guys get in there and discredit themselves. Right. Then we'll win on the backlash. People said that when Hitler was arising in Germany, and many of those people who said that died in the concentration camps. Which is a smaller tragedy than a nation dying in a sense.
Before the primaries had ended, you wrote, Hillary Clinton versus John McCain. I wouldn't know whether to vote Libertarian or move to Australia. Now we know it's Barack Obama versus John McCain. You'll vote for John McCain, but hold your nose? What's your fundamental?
Yes, the difference is the Clintons had the saving grace of utter lack of principle, which meant that when they saw which way the political winds were blowing, that's the way they'd go, regardless of what they'd been saying before. This man has been a far-left ideologue for 20 years, and not just a matter of ideology. I mean, people who are truly vile people. We're not talking about just people who have a certain theory.
Bill Ayers,
I mean, Acorn. I'm talking thuggery as the way to get your ideas across. Father Flagel. You go down the list. I judge people by what they've done, not by what they say, particularly when what they say is the direct opposite of what they've done. So that, no, I think this man really does believe that he can change the world. And people like that are infinitely more dangerous than mere crooked politicians.
If the current polls hold, the Wall Street Journal, I'm quoting the Wall Street Journal now, declared in an editorial last week, Barack Obama will win the White House on November 4th, and Democrats will consolidate their congressional majorities. Though we doubt most Americans realize it, the journal continues, this would be one of the most profound political and ideological shifts in U.S. history, close quote. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. And the repercussions extend, the fact that they will create disasters in the economy, I think will pale by comparison to what they will do in terms of countries acquiring nuclear weapons and turning those over to terrorists, which is the point of no return once that happens.
Right. I was talking about this with a colleague of ours the other day, Tom McCurdy, who's an economist here at the Hoover Institution, and Tom said, well, remember what happened when Bill Clinton became president. His point is the American people are about to get an extreme illustration of the way government intervention messes things up. Bill Clinton offered only a mild illustration, and yet even under Bill Clinton, it was only 2 years before there was enough of a backlash response that Republicans took both houses of Congress away, and the man was boxed in from that point forward. That's a pretty optimistic reading of what might happen. In fact,
very
it's
optimistic.
Very optimistic?
Yes, because there is such a thing as a point of no return. And if in those first 2 years Iran gets nuclear weapons, we will be at that point of no return, and the next generation will live under that same threat and as far out as the eye can see. And so, sometimes people who are very clever say it's just as well to let these guys get in there and discredit themselves.
Right.
Then we'll win on the backlash. People said that when Hitler was arising in Germany, and many of those people who said that died in the concentration camps. Which is a smaller tragedy than a nation dying, in a sense.
Before the primaries had ended, you wrote, Hillary Clinton versus John McCain. I wouldn't know whether to vote Libertarian or move to Australia. Now we know it's Barack Obama versus John McCain. You'll vote for John McCain, but hold your nose? What's your fundamental outlook?
Yes, the difference is that the Clintons had the saving grace of utter lack of principle, which meant that when they saw which way the political winds were blowing, that's the way they'd go, regardless of what they'd been saying before. This man has been a far-left ideologue for 20 years, and not just a matter of ideology. I mean, people who are truly vile people. We're not talking about just people who have a certain theory.
Bill Ayers.
Acorn. I mean, we're talking thuggery as the way to get your ideas across. No, I think this man really does believe that he can change the world. And people like that are infinitely more dangerous than mere crooked politicians.